Too much to say, no more.
Bad man. He ain't there.
Now all of you, get yourselves warm. Stay strong. Stay with me.
His eyes are sparkling. Our journey. See, he's thinking really clear. I think we all feel what the real man is doing in spite of black water and that whole. Yes.
You ran away. Oh, I didn't know such thing. Don't be a fool.
You do this snake. Be quiet.
I do. Save who you can and let the
You
rest
borrowed
rot.
money from my business.
Look after
Cash Strauss. You owe him. He took the money. He wants it back. What's not to understand?
Lucy. You just can't
Where's
quite
our money?
get it
I
to
don't have it.
yourself.
I gave you all I had.
Before this video begins, this is part of a video essay that I have, which is 3 hours and 15 minutes long, so if you want to go check out the full thing and watch it in your own time, then make sure to go check that out. It'll be in the link down below, but also you can find it as one of the first videos on my channel. And as well as that, there will be more of these ones coming up. They're just going to be the cut up segments that are already in that video, just kind of re-uploaded for more content, but also so that people have more digestible videos. So yeah, with that all being said, I won't badger you anymore. Have fun watching the video.
We may be here for a few days. Now all of you, get yourselves warm. Stay strong. Stay with me. We ain't done yet.
The game will first load up with some words on the screen that are going to set you up for what you're going to be spending the next 40 plus hours of your life doing. By 1899, the age of outlaws and gunslingers was at an end. America was becoming the land of laws. Even the West had mostly been tamed. A few gangs still roamed, but they were being hunted down and destroyed. They will then fade to black. Besides mentioning characters like Arthur, John, and Dutch, and other side entities like the O'Driscolls, Pinkertons, and Leviticus Cornwall, this is definitely something I would have seen on the back of the book, if it was made into a book anyway, or even on the back of the game cover. You'll hear the wind howling in the background, and then you'll start to see a caravan full of people. Dutch and Hosea will be talking about surviving, and I'll give you an indication of them being on the run. Out of the snow wall, Arthur will appear and he will lead the gang to an old mining town he has found. All the while everyone is freezing, and with that, chapter 1 will then start. Colter, which is the name of the little town that you're at currently. This game plays like a book in many ways, and it's supposed to be set up like that, especially in the way the script is written. Hosea will be holding the only source of light in sight and will open the door to a little hut in the mining town, and then the gang will be bringing in a man called Davey, who you don't know of, but you can tell has some form of relation to the gang. Dutch will start talking about his plan, how he wants us to go and find Micha and John. He'll give the first of many speeches to the Vanderlin Gang that you're going to see on screen, and he'll talk about the people that they've lost and the ones who are missing. He'll say some words that you'll question if he was even telling the truth to you, which personally I do think he was. I do think that there was genuine concern for the group. However, I think because of Micha and him being pushed further and further into a corner, you ended up seeing him become more of what he truly was deep down. Someone who just wanted to survive and have nobody tell him what to do. He is a man who has many qualities of the society he claims to despite in this game, which is one of the many interesting parts of his character. At this point, you're also getting the idea of how he actually leads the gang and the overall structure of the leadership of the gang. Right at the beginning, you'll also see Hosea and Arthur on his left, showing you as the player who is basically the next in charge and the most trusted members who are the most reliable and loyal. After getting people set up in camp, he'll utter the words you will later see to be part of his underlying idea of himself, which is that people should stay with him. He wants blind loyalty, nothing more. At this point, we don't fully understand this, but it seems like he's doing what he can to help the people who is following him. Arthur will then ask Dutch what happened on the boat in Blackwater, to his response being, "We missed you. That's what happened." Seeming to try and ignore this question, it's kind of something that you realise later on, especially in this game, that he does over and over again, which is just kind of undermine anything that Arthur ever asks, and his normal response to it is just saying, "You need to just trust me." It is literally the definition of the meme of "trust me, bro." Both of you will then head out in search for someone at this point and will be introduced to riding horses for the first time, which I don't honestly think any other game has done better at any point in the past. At points through my playthrough though, it did irritate me a little bit, especially when I'd hit trees and just fall off my horse. But the more and more I realized that, I should have just basically put more effort into riding my horse and the mechanics of the game, so it's not really the game's fault for the fact that I wasn't riding the horse properly. They also really wanted you to feel like you're riding the horse, it's not just your character riding the horse. One thing that is great about all of these animations is that all of this was done via motion capture, so it's honestly just outstanding. Whilst you start galloping through the snow, Arthur will then mention the Pinkertons. At this point you're unaware of to who they are, however Dutch will then see something over in the distance. Out of the snow will come Micha with his lantern high up, who has a slightly cynical manner in the way that he speaks. On the way to this next place that Micha has mentioned, Arthur will then ask about John. After finding out from Micha that nothing's been found, he'll then just respond with, he'll be fine, things turn out alright for that boy. Giving you an idea to how Arthur views John anyway. For myself, being someone who's never played through the first game properly, but was always aware that John was the main character of the first game, I made sure to pay special attention to him, especially when dialogue was relating to him or whenever he showed up on screen. You'll move up and talk to Micha, and in this dialogue you can tell that the two of them are at least on mutual terms. But Arthur is a lot less cynical of people when it comes to his comments about people earning their keep. You'll see the house that Micha was on about and head down to go and investigate. Arthur and Micha will ride off to the side whilst Dutch will go and talk to the people inside. The moment Dutch opens his mouth, the music will stop and it will start to have a really eerie sound, and it will become more and more obvious as you can hear the storm whistling. Micha will then mention that there is a body in the wagon. After being told to go, you'll be introduced to the fighting mechanics of this game for the first time, and have your first ever shootout. The moment you pull the trigger, the cowboy music will start playing and it will feel like you're in a great epic moment. Once you've killed them, you end up learning that they were in fact the O'Driscoll boys. You'll start looting the place, which is a core mechanic of this game, as you'll be introduced to your health bar as well, which you'll need to loot and hunt to get meat and different types of food to possibly cook. This is something that will keep you within the constant immersion of this game as well, as you'll have to hunt and do fishing, for example, to keep your health up. After you finish looting the place, you'll leave the house and Dutch will send you to go check out the barn just outside, whilst Micha will go inside and check and see if Arthur and Dutch missed anything. Once inside, an O'Driscoll will drop down, and this will give you an introduction into the one-on-one fighting mechanics, where you'll also get for the first time in this game a moment that will affect the outcome of the game: the reputation system. You have the option that you can either leave him or kill him. On my first playthrough, I decided to play through the game in a way that I think was just my gut reaction to everything. I just did what I personally thought was the best choice in each moment. So for example, on my first playthrough, I decided to kill the O'Driscoll instead of letting him live, versus my second playthrough. I do really like the honor system in this game, however, I wish that there was an actual proper ending that was 100% canon. Personally, for me, I think that the actual high honor ending was the correct ending, purely because it gives him an actual redemption arc, and it actually showed off Arthur's personality that came across to me anyway, who seemed a little bit more caring and as if he was more like Hosea by his end times. You have many different things that can affect your reputation, starting from really small accidental things like running someone over, or on purpose depending on what type of character you're playing, all the way up to things such as just helping out your random person that could give you some good rep as well. You'll have many moments in this story and in side content that can make you get better or worse, but personally I'd just say play the game in the way that you feel like your genuine response would be, and you'll get the ending you deserve. Then play this game for a second time and actually try and go for a different ending. For example, for myself, I'm actually trying to get the high honor ending on purpose this time, versus just kind of accidentally walking upon it like I did on my first playthrough, as realistically I was going to probably get the bad ending until the last chapter. One thing I want to talk about in terms of Dutch's character at this moment is that if you choose to kill him, then Dutch will be more upbeat about it. Even though it's just one word, you can tell that he seems to be more happy if you kill him versus letting him go. It's just something that I found interesting when playing through this game. And especially once you go through it a second time, you'll just pick up on the small things like that. After dealing with the O'Driscoll, you'll lead the horse to the house, however you'll hear a woman scream after Micha says something. You and Dutch will head inside, and this woman will be throwing stuff at Micha, and during this he'll then knock over the table and start a fire inside of the building. This is the first time you get introduced into the character of Zadie Adler, who I found really interesting, as she is just a character who I found not too important, to be honest, especially at the beginning. It's not until you come back from Gwarma that you find that her character is actually running things whilst Dutch was away. But this story is all about pacing, to make you come to terms and love characters that you learn about right at the beginning, and fall in love with even more by the end of the game. Arthur will utter the words that we're bad men, we just ain't them, which I found really amazing, especially on my second time playing this game. As you'll end up seeing more and more throughout this game, that the Vanderlin Gang are nothing more than the O'Driscolls. Maybe they have a little bit more better morals, but honestly, by the end of the game, all that has gone completely out the window as they've pretty much descended into something that they claimed not to be and absolutely despised. Once you're back, Zadie will head inside the place with the other women. And you can tell at this point in the game that Dutch genuinely seems like a reasonable and quite genuine person that seems to be a fairly decent guy. You'll yet again get another idea into Micha as a person, as he throws out some casual racist remarks to add to the small comments and character tropes about him that eventually add up to hatred. When the next day begins, Arthur will walk into a hut where Abigail and Hosea are. They'll ask if you and Javier can go find John, which the two of you will end up going after not really wanting to. But you'll end up following the tracks which will then lead you to John, and you'll discuss with Javier about the Blackwater massacre, and Arthur will start to learn little bits and details about what happened there, with acts like killing an innocent woman that Arthur just kind of either doesn't believe or he's questioning heavily. I feel like Arthur is kind of in disbelief more than anything. You'll find John's horse and a few moments later, John. This is the first interaction that you as the player have with John Marston, aka the protagonist of the original Red Dead Redemption, which you'll end up learning where John got his scars from, and start to get a little bit more of an inkling into John and Arthur's relationship. This game is meant to be a backstory about John, and is also a story about Arthur Morgan, but in reality it's actually about the Vanderlin Gang as a whole. To give you a background and actually set the scene for what ends up going down in Red Dead 1 and why there is this animosity between the two. You'll kill some wolves and then ride back to camp. When you get John back, she'll thank both of you and then start talking to John in the same way that, to be honest, she does talk to him throughout the entire game, including all the way up to the end of the prologue. But it's in a caring way of nagging, I suppose, in the way she goes about it anyway. You'll now get introduced into a somewhat important character, as technically, without Leopold Strauss, Arthur would have never ended up getting tuberculosis. They'll talk about how to get out of the situation that they're currently in, and then it will fade to black as another monologue from Arthur will start to play, which honestly, I always love these, especially at the beginning of each chapter of the game. It just sets the scene and mood of each chapter. What I love about this next bit, however, is just before you can go to the set of missions, you can also walk past the campfire that you're part of, which is with Hosea and Dutch, which you can obviously have more campfire experiences throughout the game, which are more like this as well, where Dutch will first ask Hosea if he is doubtful. Hosea will say no, but you can tell by his tone that he is at least very not pleased with the way things worked out in the Blackwater situation. Dutch will respond to Hosea saying that they've been shot at before, so how's this any different? Hosea simply responds with, I hope not. Which I feel like at that moment is actually a massive bit of foreshadowing for this game. And you'll see a lot of chapter 1 and chapter 2 is there's a lot of foreshadowing that goes on in these first two chapters anyway. As everything that's happened so far, even before this, so basically everything from the events of the Blackwater massacre to now, and even the end of the game, is just the full decline of the Vanderlin Gang. Which is a really interesting way to set this game, as most games like to give you a massive high right at the beginning, and then the downfall, and then another high again, to make you feel like there's actual progress going on and the momentum to keep on going to have a great story. However, in reality, this game is actually the full downhill slope of the Vanderlin Gang and Dutch as a personality. The first two chapters in this game are meant to try and highlight to you that the gang has got good elements and it's trying to go uphill again, but it's once the Pinkertons find out where they are that it all starts to crash downwards, and honestly the spiral just continues all the way to the end on the cliffside. As them being shot at in Blackwater was very different from every single time before that, mainly because of one reason, and that's because of how much the Pinkertons end up being one step ahead of them this entire time from now on. I then personally went and spoke to Bill first, where you'll get even more racist remarks from Micha. And then after Micha feels like he's been insulted, he'll decide to start a fight. But just before things are starting to get out of hand and properly escalate, Dutch will walk in and get the gang ready to go take on the O'Driscolls. Again, this is the game trying to set up more foreshadowing for you, and it's starting Dutch's paranoia against Arthur and other members of the gang. Arthur will respond to Dutch saying the O'Driscolls are not there for them, which he is actually correct. If you look into it, the O'Driscolls were there to rob the train, they weren't looking for the gang. But Dutch will just respond telling him that he should stop doubting him all the time, which is a very common trope that ends up happening in this game, that Dutch basically again just wants blind loyalty. Arthur will respond with a saying that you hear many times in this game. You always said that revenge was a luxury we can't afford. And more throughout this game, Dutch will snake his way around, making it out that he is not taking revenge. You and the gang will head out once more, and honestly, I don't know if I'm stretching here, but I've seen videos talking about it on YouTube, so it's not just me. The way that Arthur is basically involved in the groups on these horses, it's fairly symbolic, or at least seems to be mimicking how Dutch views him. So at points of the game, so Arthur will either ride all the way at the back of the group, or he'll ride right next to Dutch, which those two typically would either mean that the two in command, so you've got the person right at the front and then one at the back, making sure that they don't get tailed, or both of them at the front, basically leading the way. It's just something that I find interesting. I've seen it on other videos, and I thought it'd be just something interesting to say. You'll get more of an idea into Dutch's backstory, and you'll keep getting small comments being made by Micha, which are very teacher's pet vibes. Another mini speech by Dutch will take place, which is always in a manner of him above all the rest. Arthur and him will head up and scope out the area to see if they can see Colm O'Driscoll. This is the first time you'll see Colm properly in this game, and the way he treats his men. Both of you will talk a little bit on the way down to one another. Dutch will say to Arthur, "Have you lost faith?" He always talks about people losing faith in him as if he's some form of figure who needs to be followed. He might be the leader of the gang, but he's not a godlike figure or a messiah figure. He might like to think that he's one, especially the further you get into the game, or at least the idea of him thinking that has gone across everyone's mind. At minimum, he definitely views himself a little bit above every single person that's in the gang. You'll begin a shootout where after you've taken down all of the O'Driscolls, you'll be looking around for some dynamite. Michael will find some plans for a robbery the O'Driscolls were planning to rob Leviticus, Cornwall, which is a name you'll become more and more familiar with later on. However, none of the gang currently know who this guy is, but this is a very small event that starts a massive escalation of events funding the Pinkertons. After this, Dutch says that he intends for the gang to step ahead of everyone, not just the Pinkertons but the O'Driscolls as well, which if you've played this game you'll know definitely does not happen. Now on your way back to the camp you'll see one of the O'Driscolls on a horse, which you'll then chase down and grab. After hog-tying him, you'll take Kieran back to camp for torture and questioning. Once you drop him back at camp, you start to see the father figure idea and the friendship that Arthur and Dutch have for one another. It will then be the next day and you'll go and talk to Pearson about the lack of food, and you and Charles will go out hunting, which is one of the other core elements that this game wants you to do. And honestly, there is something actually kind of therapeutic about playing this game and just slowly and waiting for the animal to be in the right position to kill them. It's just a very calming experience in this game that goes past in a flash, and it adds to the immersion. Charles will give you a bow, and with that you'll then learn how to shoot one. The first time I did this I was really struggling. I just kept losing stamina and was missing all my shots. And this game is the definition of once you've become really good at it, you feel like you've really had a progression. There's a level of skill for this game that honestly gets completely hidden away because of the amazing storytelling qualities that Rockstar was able to perform. Once you're close enough, you'll be able to use your focus ability. That it's actually quite great, as it doesn't really intrude in this game as much as other games try to have these sorts of abilities happen, and doesn't take away from the massive amount of immersion this game brings. Once dead, you'll take the deer back to camp and you'll be on the ride back talking to Charles, which both of you will basically just catch up on everything that's been going on. And to be honest, these moments really make this game the game it is. The amount of conversations between characters in this game allows the player to fully learn everything that there is to do with these characters. Everything they've gone through all the way to present day now. Once you've skinned the deer, it will then fade to black and a couple days will pass. Arthur will walk towards John and the Reverend, who is at this point an alcoholic, which you later find out isn't just alcoholism, it's also an opioid addiction. The Reverend as well has a complete change in appearance from this point of the game all the way up to when he leaves later on, which is a great amount of growth for a character that is completely a side character, nothing more. Dutch will then walk in and start talking about the plans that he's trying to pull off for this train heist. Abigail and Jack will come into the room, and really, currently everyone who's in this room right now is basically who you're going to be spending the majority of your time in this game with. Now besides this, you'll then move on to the heist. Hosea will try and talk Dutch out of robbing the train as he thinks it's too much of a risk. He seems really vulnerable currently in comparison to what you get told about at different points of the game in his past. But this is one of the first moments that we get to see Dutch really start to be like the Dutch we end up seeing later on in the game, where he starts slowly his transformation into this just completely self-centered character. The fact that he's not even willing to listen to a level of reason and believes wholeheartedly that his view is the right view, which shows us the arrogance of his character and the blind loyalty that he wants. And to be fair to Dutch as a character at this point, he does have a lot of people around him who solely view him as the gang leader, even though both him and Hosea are really meant to be the leaders of this gang, as they were the ones who started it. It may be named after Dutch, but both of them are in fact more of the leader types of the gang. Hosea will give you an idea into who Leviticus Cornwall is, and Dutch just writes him off and says that he's got enough money to share, so basically saying, I don't care how rich and powerful he may be, I can beat him and get away with it. Which is again just another form of arrogance that Dutch has about him. Dutch will take the gang ahead to rob the train, and in this moment again you get to see how Arthur is viewed in this game. He was meant to be right next to Dutch, however I ended up falling back slightly because I just kind of forgot to hold down my thumbstick. Because he's meant to be next to Dutch in these moments, it kind of shows you where Arthur is viewed within the gang. Now one thing I want to mention now, as I'm going to be talking about throughout this video, is how this game makes you empathize with Arthur. Not only empathize, but also see through his eyes and match his emotion in these events that happen in this game. It's something that I'll keep mentioning when more examples show up. For now, keep the way that the player connects with Arthur at the back of your mind. Once you're at the track site, you'll head down to check on Bill as he tries to blow up the bridge, however it fails, which leads you, Lenny and Javier to jump onto the train, but only you and Lenny make it. Lenny is a character that I came to really like, as he's one of the greenest members of the group, but honestly he seems willing and eager to learn, and unlike Dutch, Micha and Bill, doesn't treat Arthur worse during the entire game. You will end up stopping the train and fighting a massive amount of men who are protecting this train, and after getting inside the main area you'll find some bonds. And this is the moment that leads Cornwall to give more funding to the Pinkertons to hunt down the Vanderlin Gang. You'll arrive back at the camp and Hosea and Dutch seem a bit more in higher spirits. Hosea will recommend that the camp goes to Horseshoe Overlook near Valentine, and Dutch will say to Arthur and Hosea that he knows that they like to talk about the good old days and what's gone wrong with old Dutch. This is one of those things that when you're playing through the game for the first time, you're really going to think nothing of it and just consider it kind of just general banter, I guess. But it becomes a more and more common thing that Dutch starts to talk about how people are losing faith in him. So as you can already see right at the beginning of this game, there's already doubt in people's minds as to where the gang is going and what the actual plan is. This then leads you to the last mission of chapter 1, which is really nice and calm. These sorts of missions come every now and again in this game, which is actually a really nice add-on. This gives a really nice end to this really chaotic moment at the beginning of the game where you're in this snowy mountain on the run into a really rich and vibrant land. Dutch will send Micha and Lenny off to scout ahead, which doesn't go to plan, but we aren't there just yet. This is done for a very specific reason, to show you the kinship between Dutch, Arthur and Hosea throughout the first 2 chapters of this game. These first 2 chapters are trying to cement the bond between all 3 of these characters and end up trying to show you the love that all 3 of them have for one another in their own ways, which you'll end up seeing slowly get eroded away, which eventually ends up getting an exponential increase by the last 2 chapters. Whilst riding to Horseshoe Overlook, you'll be taking in the game's amazing scenery. The wheel of the wagon will come off, which leads to a moment of this game showing you for the first time the natives, and a storyline will eventually go on later on, but in this moment you're actually seeing eagle flies and rain falls above you, I believe. It looks like them anyway. You get to listen to Hosea talk about the history of the Americans and the natives. There's a level of empathy that some in the gang have for them, as they both see themselves as one against the machine that is colonization and change from the cowboy and bounty hunter era of America to a civilized empire. You get some interesting conversations going on that really makes the interaction feel real between Hosea, Charles and Arthur when asking questions like, how can you rob and kill people pleasantly? We don't, in spite of Dutch's talk. Which is really interesting to see from Charles as a character, as he starts off as being a massive side character, and he kind of is throughout the whole game. However, he shows up more and more throughout the last 3 chapters of the game, as he's more of basically what Arthur kind of wants to be in a way. Charles can already see through the lies that they're nothing more than a bunch of killers. Dutch wants to make it out as if they're not, and that they do everything because they have some actual form of morality that they just want to live without being penalized by a government. But I do like how Charles's character never really changes. His character stays the same, with the same morals and same virtues. He's one of the few in this game that don't really have a bit of a character shift in terms of being a side character. Arthur and John end up kind of changing a little bit. Obviously at the beginning they're a lot more friendlier towards Dutch and they believe wholeheartedly in his plan. John starts to fade away a bit earlier than Arthur, but Arthur really starts to notice by the last 2 chapters in this game. Hosea will make the comment, you know, maybe it's me who changed, not him. But we kept telling him the ferry job didn't feel right. You and me had a real lead back in Blackwater that could have worked out. It just isn't like Dutch to lose his head like that. Things go wrong sometimes, people die, it's the way it is. Always has been. At this point, you can see Arthur has full allegiance to whatever the plan might be and doesn't really doubt Dutch at all. One easy way of being able to see this from Arthur is because no matter what Hosea is actually saying to Arthur, he comes up with a reason that can kind of justify Dutch's actions, and generally speaking, he doesn't question any of Dutch's actions anyway. Not until later on that he starts to really see things from Hosea's point of view. I feel like Arthur becomes Hosea, but with a younger man's strength, which is obviously deteriorating once he gets tuberculosis. Arthur is like Dutch and Hosea, however I'd personally hope to think that he's more like Hosea than he is Dutch. Personally, at least in the way that I played him throughout this game, and I know some people played him more brutally, but throughout how I played him and how he came across to me in all of the cutscenes, he seems more like Hosea than he would be like Dutch. And yeah, especially during chapters 4 to 6, he definitely reminds me of Hosea a lot more than he does Dutch. You'll arrive at the campfire with Dutch being very happy with Hosea's choice of location. Two interesting things happen here. Hosea will talk to Dutch once again about the Blackwater massacre, and with that we learn that it was because of Micha's interference that Dutch ended up going with Micha's plan in the end. The second change to Dutch is the change of his clothes, which obviously you notice right away and I picked up on straight away because I always felt like he looked really out of place from the group. You don't realise the significance of this until you dive deeper into Dutch's personality. The clothes that he wears is blatantly obvious that he stands out above the rest. He claims to hate a civilization but dresses exactly like them. This, in my opinion, is a subtle nod to how his character is a massive hypocrite. His character itself, really, if he could be, he would be Leviticus Cornwall. All he has to answer to is a little bit of the government, but mostly he gets his way because he has all the money. So if Dutch could have the money and be Leviticus Cornwall, he 100% would. I personally just think that Dutch just didn't want to answer to anyone, and he viewed it as, well, I'm not as rich as other people, so I'm going to go out of my way to become a criminal and live the life of freedom fighters, when in reality they're just a bunch of robbers who at the beginning may have had morals, but eventually that completely goes out the window. Hosea will talk about how he just wants people to be safe, as he knows he won't be alive for too much longer. You can kind of tell though that he doesn't trust Dutch in his master plan, as it always seems to be the same thing: get money and move, until the magical day that they are all left alone. Arthur will eventually see what Hosea has been seeing this whole time, which was that the government was never not going to let up on chasing Dutch and the rest of the gang. Strauss will head off into town to get people to join into his short-term loans that are just loan shark deals. Dutch will get everyone to start earning their keep, quote unquote. In this moment, you'll see that Dutch, Hosea and Arthur are all standing together, like they were earlier. Dutch in charge, but he has his two best men, which eventually changes when Micha starts to snake his way into second in command. You'll see another moment of Arthur journaling and making notes about his life. Hosea will then greet Arthur by giving him some coffee and mentioning that he's just going to go back and read. This is the first proper moment in this game though that you're now allowed to go off and properly do some proper exploration. This is after 2.5 hours of playing the game, and this was a massively bold move for Rockstar to make. As in comparison to other games like Assassin's Creed or even things like GTA. Both GTA and Assassin's Creed blatantly have an obvious opening, but this game never really does. Yes, Chapter 1 is the opening of the game, I would definitely say that you could probably say that. However, I feel like it's not until the end of Chapter 2 where you've got so much more nailed down that solidifies the rest of the story. This game's story flows so well together that honestly you never really notice it go out of being an opening to the rest of the game. Many great films do this. One great example of that would be something like The Irishman, where it never really changes its pace. It always stays the same. It doesn't have to ramp up to try and make the audience expectations go anywhere. It's just a great film through and through, and Red Dead 2 is a great example of that in games. The pacing never really changes. It stays the same, but it's interesting because it's a great story being told. Now, the reason why I feel like this game doesn't have a proper opening is because most games, movies, and TV shows have openings where they're setting you up with the key characters, which this one does, the world that you're going to be living in, which again, this one does to a decent degree, not the full extent. And normally when you're looking at more gritty stories like this one, you also are getting some ideas of the adversity the characters are facing and are being forced to face throughout this game, which you kind of get an idea of in this game. This game will present you with a leading narrative of this game, which is mainly that the gang is slowly breaking down into two main factions. You have Arthur's side, which I'd say Hosea belongs to, and then you have Dutch's side of the gang, which would have people like Micha, Bill, and Javier. Now this is definitely the main story that's being told here, but overall I'd say the story of Red Dead is primarily one that is meant to be of great sadness and just depth in the decline of personalities, characters, and the gang as a whole. You see everyone stay who they actually were meant to be. Besides Dutch, that is, anyway. Micha never really changes, he's always been this sick and twisted man, but Dutch goes from being a man who at the beginning of this game has been both part facade but also real. I personally, like I've mentioned, think that he just believed his own lies. He goes from someone who's fairly honourable, as far as criminals go anyway. He becomes someone who truly doesn't care about anyone in his gang. None of them are truly family to Dutch. You see this over and over again the further you get into this story. But the side story that is being played through this game is Arthur's health decline, which is why I don't feel like the end of chapter 1 is the true opening of this game, because by the end of chapter 2 you've got a baseline understanding of what's going to be happening. Obviously the tuberculosis doesn't start kicking in until later, but you get an idea of it anyway. We'll class that as the opening of the game, however, as that is probably what was intended, which was chapter 1 to kind of set the scene for everything. But we're now going to talk about why the opening was important and the key elements that made it as good as it was. So one of the areas that I really love about this game, and I mentioned a moment ago, is that Arthur is a character that is just fighting with a good man that's within himself. This is the Hosea side of his personality that just wants people to be safe when he's gone, which doesn't end up coming around until later on when he is diagnosed. But you can kind of still see remnants of it earlier on in the game, where he does seem like he actually cares for members of the gang. Others not so much. For example, Micha he doesn't really care about. However, he comes to realise that there's much more in life than just murdering and robbing people. He starts to realise that life is much more about time than it is about making others' lives worse. This first chapter shows you the start of the decline of the Vanderlin Gang. You get some insight into the Blackwater Massacre, and Arthur doesn't really know what to feel about it. He doesn't really want to think that Dutch would do something like that and just start losing himself to the devil like Micha. This intro obviously sets you up with the most important characters that you need to know about. You also get a view of the hierarchy of the gang, as Dutch and Hosea are meant to be on the same level. However, Hosea is really just beneath him and is classed as one of his most trusted advisors. One of the other things I actually just thought about as well whilst doing the recording for this is that it's not only just the downfall of the Vanderlin Gang that's going on, it's also the kind of like good part of Arthur's personality that starts to come from it. So even though the story is one that's meant to be a tragic tale of this gang that were like a family going into chaos, you end up with a character that actually has become better out of it. And I think that's actually kind of a very nice story that's been told. But yeah, just thought I'd throw that in. You can see that Arthur is almost on the same level as Hosea in terms of his opinions, as he gets the deciding vote in the train robbery and in another robbery in the future. But there's also a third voice in there, and that third voice is Micha. He's almost completely unheard of, however, and is basically not even in the first 2 chapters of this game, or is at least in very small amounts of it anyway. You still get an intro into the hated character, but you don't get properly into it until later on in the second chapter and then onwards. The divide really ends up being split into 2 versions of the gang. You have Micha, Bill and Javier, who all blindly follow Dutch all the way to the end, and they're even following him blindly early on as well. I'd definitely say that Arthur is in this camp, but he's able to recognise the issues at hand. Then you have the second area, which is Charles, John, Lenny and Zadie later on in this game. But for now, as she is, she's currently a lot more of a side character than anything else. Charles, from the first instance, you can tell is very self-aware and is extremely aware of how the gang is truly, and doesn't really believe any of the sugarcoating and lies that Dutch tells. John, even though he and Arthur don't get along properly anyway at this moment in the game, John can at least see a little bit more through Dutch's lies than Arthur even can. And if anything, he actually starts to call Dutch out a lot more than any of the other characters in the gang, making Arthur at this point question the plan entirely. And Lenny, who is the newest member of the gang, but a lot more level-headed than many of the others, all he wants to do is impress the likes of Arthur, Dutch and Hosea. In a way, I feel like Lenny looked up to Arthur, which made the moment in Saint Denis even more tragic. The first chapter of this game is set up in a specific way, a way to show you as the player everything that's been going on briefly, and also how the characters feel about how the gang is currently. You also get a little bit of an understanding into the small cracks in the glass, which is the foundation of this gang, and you can basically see it in how Dutch is right at the beginning, saying that people are losing faith in him. You don't really understand what this means until later on though. This first chapter is a true testament to Rockstar's willingness to tell an amazing story above all else. The The reason why this game is remembered to this day is because of its story, nothing else. People may complain about how long the first chapter of this game is, but what people seem to forget is that this chapter, if you really listen and pay attention to detail, is one of the more pivotal moments of this game, understanding the downfall of the group and where it started. The way that this game keeps information away from you as the player, and even Arthur as the character, really gives you the connection that you can possibly have with his character. You understand why he feels the way he does, and in a way you kind of become one with Arthur as a character, because of the lack of information from the beginning of the story all the way to the end of the story. He's left out of different things and you don't understand a lot of what goes on because you only get told what Dutch wants to tell you. This game truly mastered the idea of walking in someone else's boots and making you feel a certain way, and especially makes you connect to the emotions that Arthur feels throughout this game. Most importantly with this introduction though is that it teaches you a lot about what you need to know about how the gameplay works, for instance, being able to hog tie people, fight, ride, the core system and the honor system. This sets up in the first chapter something that many games like Assassin's Creed will do over the course of an hour, but it's done with a lot more detail and a lot more of an interesting storytelling than it does in those other games, and it makes it a lot more enjoyable than the likes of the Assassin's Creed franchise. I'm someone who really loves Assassin's Creed 2 and even the whole of the Ezio trilogy, so I love Ezio as a character. But when it comes to Arthur, I think Arthur does completely beat out any other gaming character, just by the way he is designed and the way the story tells his story. All of this adds up into a way that so many of us absolutely love his character and honestly wish that we got even more time with him. This is something that I will be going into later on in this video, talking about why I love this character so much, so make sure to keep watching to get that. That is right at the end of talking about the story as a whole.